Last week, unfortunately, we had technical difficulties, shall we say, and we lost a portion of the video. I'm assuming that we are recording tonight.
We are recording and not recording music.
Okay, so if you will forgive me, I am going to go over a little bit about what we talked about last week for anyone who may want to view the videos at a later date or who have just joined us. Last week we started in Daniel chapter 2. If you have not read Daniel chapter 2, you'll want to stop this video at this point in time and read the chapter as we have already done, because you'll get lost if you do not. But we have talked about the fact that it was the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and we have talked about the fact that there are those critics that cannot rectify the idea that it was the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, but in chapter 1, the three men, or the three comrades of Daniel and himself have completed 3 years of training, and we had suggested that the best way to rectify that idea is that the first year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar was the year of ascension, which would be the first year of their training. The year that Nebuchadnezzar would ascend to the throne would be equal to the first year of their training. The second year of the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign then would be the second year of their training. The third year of their training, of course, would be then the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. We'd also mentioned, or perhaps we did not mention, that it did not require in their idiom of speech a full 3 years completion of training in order for them to have 3 years of training. Any more that it takes 72 hours, Jesus had to be in the grave 72 hours for him to have been in the grave for 3 days. That was the way that they spoke. That's their idiom of speech. So if they had had parts of 3 years of training, they had completed 3 years. That is the way that they spoke. That's the idiom of their speech, or their manner of speech. And we have several different scriptures we can look to that talks about that, both in the Old and in the New Testament. So, when we start the second chapter, it is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. It is sometime after the three men have completed their training. They are now considered part of the wise men, and that is why they are sought to be destroyed, if you already read the chapter. So, as we began the chapter, we find that Nebuchadnezzar has dreamed dreams. Now, we didn't really talk about the fact that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams. That it is in the plural that Nebuchadnezzar has dreamed dreams. Now, we didn't talk about the fact that perhaps he has fallen back to sleep several different times, or he has dreamed this dream over several days before he's called his advisors together. But nonetheless, at some point he is scared enough and bothered enough that he calls his advisors together, and he cannot sleep anymore because this dream bothers him so much. Okay, in verse 2 we have talked about the fact that there are several groups of individuals that are called together. The astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, and they are to interpret his dream. Now, the term Chaldean here is not used in the ethnic sense. They are a group or a tribe of Chaldeans, but now they are talked about as being wise men. This is a different usage of the word Chaldean here. In verse 3, the king tells them he wants to know what the dream is, and he wants to know about that dream. In the full usage of the word know, he wants to fully understand what that dream is. Verse 4, we understand at this point that they now begin to speak to the king in Syriac or in the Aramaic language. And we also noted that from verse 4 through the chapter 7, through the end of the chapter 7, that now the book in the Hebrew Old Testament now is written in Aramaic. We suggested that that could indicate several things. This portion of the book was known to all the people of Babylon. I've also suggested that it most likely was written in the king's annals. All right. Verse 5, he tells the Chaldeans, now notice all of the wise men, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldean, and everyone is summed up in the term Chaldeans. Okay? He answered and said unto the Chaldeans, the things is gone from me. If you do not make known unto me the dream and the interpretation thereof, you will be cut into pieces, and your houses will be made known, made into dunghills. So now he issues a threat. Okay? He was ready for them. I want you to tell me what the dream is, and I want you to tell me what the interpretation is. He is now showing some certain amount of irritation and issues a threat. He is ready for them. It would seem that he already knows what they're going to say, what they're going to do, and he is ready for that. And he doesn't like it. He doesn't like what he sees coming. Okay? In verse 6, he tells them, but if you show me the dream and the interpretation thereof, there is going to be gifts and rewards and great honor. All right? Now, verse 7, they turn back again to the king. This time they speak a little softer, a little kinder. They're almost begging the king, but not quite. But they are speaking in, what's the right word? They are being very diplomatic in their speech to the king. And they answered and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. So now they're trying to be as diplomatic as they can. They don't want to upset the king. They've already seen where the king is headed, but they're trying to be diplomatic. They want to give the king what he wants, but it's not boding well for them, as you can see. All right? Verse 8, the king answers and said, I know of what? I know of a certainty. Now see, this is an interesting thing that the king does, because see, most kings would not want to anger the gods. We've already talked about the fact that Nebuchadnezzar shows himself to be a religious man. Most kings would not want to anger the gods of the time, so he's not going to take his priests and his astrologers and his wise men and that type of thing and issue a real threat to them of this sort and take a chance of angering everyone in the kingdom and those priests in the kingdom by doing what he's doing here. But he sees a discrepancy here, doesn't he? He sees something that he doesn't like, and he's issuing a threat. And this obviously is not a void threat, is it? This is a real threat.
Looks like from reading here that he has had enough experience with this group of so-called wise people, wise men, and he has become doubtful. But to a certain degree, he believes or knows that they are fooling him, and they have collaborated together, in fact, to do these things and not tell him the truth. He's had enough of it. And so he says, well, you tell me the dream first, and then the interpretation.
Then I will know that you know the interpretation. Exactly. He wants to know that they can actually do what they say that they can do, right? Tommy, did you have something?
Now, I just wondered, we all have dreams and then we can't really recall them. You think I dreamed something, but I don't remember what it was. I don't think that's the case here. I think he knew his dream. He recalled the dream. And like John was saying there, he's wanting them to prove that they can do what they say they can. It's not that he's forgotten his dream, like we all can do.
That's an argument amongst a lot of the commentators whether he could actually remember his dream or he can't remember his dream. I know from my personal experience, you lay there and you have a dream, a real bad dream, and it kind of startles you and it wake you up out of your sleep, and for a few moments you can remember the dream, and then the dream goes away from you. But a little bit later, somebody can say something to you, or Shayla can say something, and say you were saying something or another about this, and then part of that dream will come back to you. And that's what you were dreaming then, but for a little while you couldn't remember what it was. I don't know if he actually can't remember the dream, or if he remembered the dream and he was just testing them. It seems more likely what you're saying, that he actually remembers it. Otherwise, how is it that God is actually telling him something? That's the basis I base that on. God wouldn't be telling him something if he actually couldn't remember something. God is telling him something through his dream. If he couldn't remember the dream, then how would he know what God was telling him? And that's the reason I base that thought. Something to think about. But there is a difference now, and you'll see the difference. There's a difference now between how God speaks to Nebuchadnezzar and then how God speaks to Daniel. And there's a different word that's used.
But based on what he says to him in verse 9, it does sound like he does not trust him. I mean, he says there, you've agreed to speak lying and corrupt words to me. Tell me the dream, and then I'll know you can give the interpretation.
And I think that's the basis of the situation here. He does not trust these people. And that's the basis of what the point that I make at the end of your notes here. If you have a religion that is not the truth, even though it makes you feel good, it cannot bring you closer to God. No matter how good you feel about it. Feel-good stuff makes you feel good. But if it's not the truth, what good does it do? I can believe all the lies in the world. And what's it going to get me? How far does it get me in science? How far does it get me in history? How far does it get me in any field if I believe a lie? Nebuchadnezzar wants the truth. And I really think there's something here about the integrity of this man. When we go out to teach the gospel, I want to find an individual that's a truth seeker. He may argue his point, he may believe in something that is false, but if he is a truth seeker, and you teach him the truth, he cannot hang on to his falsehood, look at the truth, and remain to hang on to his falsehood. He has to rectify the two. And you cannot do that if you believe truth. You have to give up the falsehood, and you have to accept the truth, as hard as that is to do. And Nebuchadnezzar seems to be one of those individuals that wants to know truth.
Keith, I think a lesson that you're kind of hitting at that's very important here too is how hollow the feel-good message really is. And we can compare that to what some people seek in religion today. They want to go to church and they want to leave feeling good all the time, or feeling uplifted, or feeling more spiritual, or whatever the case may be, or something. And they want pep talks, or they want, and obviously the scripture is powerful to encourage and edify, and part of the, part of our preaching needs to be that. But a lot of people, that's all they want, is just this feel-good message. And that's the reason the most popular preachers on TV never talk about sin or hell or things of that nature. But this shows how hollow that message really is, because Nebuchadnezzar was fine with these wise men telling him what he wanted to hear for a long time. He was fine with it, until there came a time when he was so troubled that message was hollow. And that's how it shows how hollow that message really wasn't any good. Because when he needed, when he found something that really troubled him, he couldn't find what the feel-good message didn't do him any good.
Okay. Yeah, and that's exactly the point. We can't look at our horoscopes. We can't look at the other things that might make us feel good for a moment, and it fulfill our lives. There's no fulfillment in it. Okay? Verse 10. This is the first thing the Chaldeans say that is actual truth, right? The answer and said to the king, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Not a man by themselves. That's the first thing they said that was true, right? Therefore, no king, lord, ruler that asks such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. Nobody's ever asked anything like this before. You can almost hear the cry in their voice. No one's ever asked like this, something like this before, because nobody can do it.
It's kind of reminiscent to when Moses and Aaron went before Pharaoh, and the magicians, were able to go to a certain point, but then obviously Moses and Aaron proved something beyond that. It's very similar to that. And of course, we don't learn from history, though.
Yeah, if anything that we learn from history is we don't learn from history. That's a fact. Okay, and they continue on. Is a rare thing that the king requireth. There's none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Well, they've finally spoken the truth. Verse 12, for this cause the king was angry and very furious, and he commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Now, that's a pretty kind of going a long ways, don't you think? Destroy all the wise men because his counselors, the ones that come before him, can't answer his question?
He was supposed to have a cream of the crop.
The best in the kingdom. Best in the whole world at that point, the known world.
They couldn't answer it. What good were they?
Verse 13, and the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Why would they seek Daniel and his fellows? Well, they were now considered part of the wise men, because at the end of chapter 1, now they are incorporated with the wise men. Right? They may not have had any official duties at that point in time, but they were still, now they were no longer trainees, now they were wise men. So now they were to be sought to be slain. Some of the commentators make a big deal that, well, didn't they know where they were? I think it's a silly question. I think it's a foolish question. Of course they knew where they were. But still, they got to go get them, right? That's all the statement is making. Where were they staying? Were they in the king's house? Were they outside of the castle? Were they staying in Bell Street, behind the bakery in apartment 14? Was one of them going to get bread? They obviously were not captives at this point, so they were wandering around. Obviously, they still had to be rounded up, right? Even if you know where they live, you still got to go get them. This is a foolish question for someone to ask. Of course, they have to be rounded up. I don't know where they lived. No one, it doesn't say where they lived. But no matter where they lived, even if it was in the king's castle, they were not captives. They could have been walking around doing whatever their daily duties were, and they still had to be rounded up in order to be slain. All right, and then Daniel, verse 14, starts a new section. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch. Now, who's Arioch?
Keeper.
He's the captain of the king's guard. He's the head executioner. He didn't seem to be too anxious to carry out his task, did he? Not from what we could see. Otherwise, he'd have dropped Daniel as soon as he saw him. But Daniel answers him in a wise way. Notice everything Daniel does is in a wise way. Here's a very young man, very prudent. He is calm, he is collected, and prudent in the things that he does. Christians should always be centered. Men of God should always be centered. Women of God should always be centered. We don't go running around going, oh, the sky is falling. But I see people doing that all the time, right? Why is that? Because in chapter 1, we've already found out God is in control. No matter what happens, God is in control. So ultimately things are going to work out. We don't know how. May not be the best way that I would like it to be, but it's going to be the way God is going to have it to be.
But these, Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego had set themselves apart too by not eating the king's meat. And so everybody probably knew there's something different about these men. And there was probably, obviously this...
And God had given them special gifts as well, so they probably knew they were there for a more important purpose than just to be killed as well. So they had a reason to be a little more calm than usual.
And I think too, the time that they were there, they acted like godly men, and they developed relationships with these people. And they didn't.
But shouldn't we all?
They didn't make enemies. Yeah.
Shouldn't we all? As much as within us, we're supposed to be at peace with all men, right? Okay, so he talks to the king's guard, and he answers and says to him, why is the decree so hasty? There's several different ways to translate that term. Why is it so rash? Why is it so brutal, or I forgot the word that I was trying to say, but anyway, you get the idea. Why is that coming from the king in such a rash fashion? And then Arioch tells Daniel what has happened. Now, verse 16 is interesting. Daniel then goes in and desires of the king that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation. What in your mind happened here?
the king's already talked to Daniel and he's been and found him to be 10 times wiser. And so now when Daniel walks in and says, give me a little time, I can tell you the interpretation, I think they sort of have a little bit of a relationship already. He's going to give him that time. He's going to trust him.
Okay. What I see happening actually here is this. Just like Ruth, when we read the book of Ruth, could not go to see the king anytime she wanted to, or anyone else, there is a protocol for going and approaching the king. And whatever that protocol is, whoever you had to approach in order to get an appointment, to schedule an appointment, this is where he went to go. He went to schedule an appointment to go see the king and tell him, this is what I'm going to do. Give me an appointment. Give me a time that I can go in and see the king. You couldn't just walk in and see the king anytime you want to. You couldn't walk in and bust in front of Nebuchadnezzar anytime you wanted to. I had to appoint a time. He says, appoint a time. That's scheduling an appointment. Just like you're going to go see your dentist. So now he's asked for an appointed time. Then what's the next thing he does? He goes back to his friends. He goes back to his 3 friends, and what do? They pray. Now he shows some confidence. He says, I'm going to show the thing to the king. That's what the appointment was for, right? But he doesn't just stop at that. Now he goes and tells his friends about the situation. And then he tells them, after in verse 17, he makes the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, his companions. In verse 18, he says that we desire what of God? Mercies. Isn't it interesting that that word would be used? We would desire mercies of the living God, of the God of heaven, concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Now that leaves questions in my mind. Were some of the wise men of Babylon already dying? Kind of sounds like it. Arioch wasn't real happy about his duty at that point. And I think when you see what he does a little later, you would sound like maybe he really wasn't real happy about having to do what he was having to do.
When the decree went out, though, I mean, they were dead men walking.
Pretty much. The decree had gone out. They had the decree of death over their heads.
In 13, it says they began killing the wise men. So I don't know how quickly, but it felt like there were some that got caught pretty quick.
I think something to consider also is if Daniel really didn't know that the decree had gone out until he was approached, he couldn't know what the dream was until God revealed it to him. So he's asking for time to allow God to reveal to him what he wants him to do, because he's got to submit to God for instructions, and that's what he's doing. He's asking, he's not saying it as such, but he's saying, let me go ask the power, the one that has the power to tell this, because I don't. And that's what he's doing. He's asking the power. So.
Yes, exactly. He has that consultation with God first before he can go before the king. That's exactly right. Okay? So in verse 19, he gets it. And this is what I was talking about. There's a difference between the words that are used. And then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night what? Vision. What's the difference between a vision and a dream?
I think a vision is a lot clearer. That's what God wanted him to
vision would be clear, but vision is also something normally when someone is awake. It comes to them when they're awake. So he's there praying, asking God. The four of them are all sitting there praying, and or at least they have prayed. And the vision comes to Daniel, and the secret is revealed to Daniel in that night vision, sometime in that night. And then at the end of verse 19, Daniel gives thanks. In verse 20, we hear how he gives thanks. And Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." How appropriate for what he's about to reveal, right? Wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings. He setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom to the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. Well, Daniel knew where the understanding was coming from. He prayed for that wisdom, and he received it because he had asked God for the giver of wisdom. Verse 22, he revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. Who reveals the dark things? God does. He's the only one who can. Verse 23, I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my father, who hath given me wisdom and might, and hath made known unto me what we. Did you catch that part? He said, given to me what, who? What we have desired of thee. For thou hast made known unto us the king's matter. So he's been revealed the secret. He thanks God for giving him that power, that ability, that wisdom, that might. And that was great power at that point in time, wasn't it? To be able to reveal the secret? That was power. But notice he doesn't leave out his three friends in his prayer, does he? And though I'm not going to elaborate much on those two things, I think there's great lessons about integrity in that we and us. I think there's great lessons about when we pray, particularly when we have public prayers, that we need to remember who we're praying with and who we're praying about, and how we incorporate those that are in our hearing. I think oftentimes integrity is overlooked. But Daniel is a person of great integrity.
You think too that, Jeremiah prophesied of the fact that there would be a period of time that Judah would be in captivity to Babylon, but it was a period of time that would come to an end, 70 years. And Daniel, obviously not knowing the vision before he went to the king, knew God said, some of us are coming out of here. And if he kills us all, then, that prophecy wouldn't be fulfilled. So I wonder if maybe in the back of Daniel's mind, he was thinking, God prophesied that some of us would be leaving here.
Yeah, I don't know if he had that prophecy at that time or not, but we know he does later. But he knew he was there for a reason. He knew that all the way back in chapter 1. All right, we will start with verse 24 next week. And I think this is one of several prayers that I think are very beautiful in the Scriptures and good for us to read and understand. I thank you very much for your kind attention.